there is a strange kind of pain that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with disaster or tragedy. It doesn't shatter your world in one moment. Instead, it whispers. You wake up one day and realize something unsettling. Years have passed, and nothing meaningful has changed. You're older, you're busier, you're more tired, but somehow you're still standing in the same place, emotionally, mentally, existentially. The dreams you once carried feel distant now, almost embarrassing to remember. The goals you once spoke about confidently have faded into vague someday thoughts, and the life you imagined yourself living feels more like a story you once read than a future you're moving toward. This isn't laziness and it isn't stupidity, it's something far more dangerous because it feels harmless. It's drift. Most people don't ruin their lives through catastrophic decisions, they lose them slowly through silence, hesitation, and comfort. They keep waiting, waiting to feel ready, waiting for clarity, waiting for motivation, waiting for the right moment. And while they wait, life keeps moving. The terrifying truth is this: life does not punish passivity immediately, it rewards it with comfort. At first, you stay in the familiar job because it's stable. You remain in the same routines because they are predictable. You avoid difficult conversations because peace feels better than tension. And for a while, it works. Nothing collapses, nothing explodes, nothing forces you to change. But beneath that calm surface, something vital begins to decay. Your sense of agency, your sense of meaning, your belief that your choices actually matter. Philosophers have warned about this state for centuries, not as failure, but as sleep, a kind of waking unconsciousness where the body moves forward but the soul stays still. You go through the motions of living without fully inhabiting your life. And what makes this state so dangerous is that it feels normal. Everyone around you seems to be doing the same thing: scrolling, distracting, enduring. So you tell yourself, this must just be how life is. But deep down, you know that's not true. Because every once in a while, usually late at night, something stirs, a quiet discomfort, a vague anxiety you can't fully explain, a feeling that time is slipping through your fingers faster than you expected. That feeling is not your enemy. It's your awareness trying to wake you up. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard described this sensation as existential anxiety. Not fear of danger, but fear of possibility. Fear of realizing that you could live differently, but haven't. That awareness is painful, so most people do what humans are best at. They numb it. They drown it in entertainment. They bury it under busyness. They silence it with routines. But here's the paradox no one tells you. The more you avoid that discomfort, the stronger it becomes. Because that discomfort isn't trying to harm you, it's trying to move you. There's a reason moments of deep regret almost always involve inaction. People rarely say, I wish I had never tried. They say, I wish I had started sooner. I wish I hadn't waited. I wish I had taken the chance. Regret doesn't come from effort. It comes from hesitation. Ancient Stoic philosophers understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius warned that a human being can waste an entire lifetime preparing to live, always rehearsing, always planning, never stepping fully into action. And the tragedy is not that these people lack intelligence or talent, it's that they underestimate how silently time works. Time doesn't shout, it doesn't threaten, it just passes. And one day, you look back and realize that your life was shaped not by what you chose, but by what you avoided choosing. This is where many people make a critical mistake. They assume the problem is motivation. If I just felt more inspired, if I had more discipline, if I wasn't so afraid? But fear isn't the root problem. Fear has always existed. Every meaningful action in history was taken in the presence of fear. The real problem is something quieter, a habit of standing still, a habit of postponing life, a habit of letting comfort override conviction. Psychologically, the brain is wired to protect you from uncertainty. What once kept our ancestors alive now keeps modern humans stuck. Your brain prefers the known, even if the known is unfulfilling, over the unknown that could transform you. So it whispers lies that sound reasonable. Now isn't the right time. You need more information. Wait until things feel safer. Don't risk stability. And because these thoughts don't sound irrational, you believe them. Days pass, weeks pass, years pass, and slowly, without noticing, you begin to identify as someone who doesn't act, someone who waits, someone who watches life instead of shaping it. This is where the deepest danger lies, not in a single decision, but in identity. When inaction becomes who you think you are, you stop asking what you want. You stop imagining different futures. You stop trusting yourself to move. At that point, passivity is no longer a behavior, it's a worldview. And once that worldview sets in, change feels impossible. Not because it is, but because you no longer believe it's allowed. Yet here's the truth most people never confront. Your life will not suddenly feel meaningful before you act. Meaning is not a feeling you wait for. Meaning is something you build through effort, through risk, through movement. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps, observed something extraordinary. People could endure almost any suffering, as long as they believed their actions still mattered. Meaning doesn't come from comfort, it comes from responsibility, from choosing, even when the outcome is uncertain. And this brings us to a quiet but critical realization. You don't escape passivity by thinking your way out of it. You escape it by interrupting it, by acting before certainty arrives, by moving before confidence appears, by choosing direction over perfection. Because clarity does not come before action. Clarity comes from action. And in the next session, we'll expose the subtle psychological mechanisms that keep intelligent, capable people frozen, and why waiting feels safe, even as it slowly steals your future. At some point, every person who feels stuck asks the same question, even if they never say it out loud. If I know I'm unhappy where I am, why don't I just change? On the surface, the answer seems obvious: fear, doubt, uncertainty. But those words are too shallow to explain what's really happening. Fear alone doesn't stop people. If it did, no one would ever do anything meaningful. People climb mountains afraid. They start businesses afraid. They speak the truth afraid. So, why does fear paralyze some people completely while others move forward with it sitting right beside them? The answer lies in how the human mind learns to interpret effort. Psychologists have known for decades that the brain is not neutral, it is predictive. It constantly asks one question beneath every decision: is this worth the energy? When effort repeatedly fails to produce results, the brain quietly adjusts its expectations. Not consciously, not dramatically, silently. You stop expecting effort to matter. This is how people become trapped long before they realize it. Not because they failed once, but because they failed enough times without understanding why. A rejected application, an ignored message, a goal abandoned halfway through. Each moment seems small, but together they teach the brain a dangerous lesson. Trying doesn't change anything, and once that lesson settles in, inaction begins to feel rational. Why push if nothing moves? Why risk disappointment if the outcome feels predetermined? This is not weakness, it's conditioning. The mind learns patterns the same way muscles learn movement, and through repetition. But here's where things turn dark. The brain doesn't distinguish between external failure and internal meaning. So instead of concluding, that attempt didn't work, it concludes, I don't work. This is how behavior transforms into identity. You stop seeing hesitation as something you do. You start seeing it as something you are. I'm just not disciplined. I've never been confident. I've always struggled with consistency. Those sentences feel harmless. They sound honest, but they're not descriptions. They're cages. Once identity locks in, behavior follows automatically. A person who believes they're bad at starting things won't start. That not because they can't, but because doing so would contradict who they think they are. And the brain avoids identity conflict at all costs, so it protects the story. It steers you back toward comfort, back toward familiarity, back toward patterns that confirm what you already believe about yourself. This is why self awareness alone doesn't change lives. You can understand your problems perfectly and remain stuck forever because the obstacle isn't knowledge, it's momentum. And momentum is created by action, not insight. Philosophers have warned about this trap under many names. Aristotle called it akrasia, knowing the good yet failing to do it. Nietzsche described it as a quiet decay of will. Modern psychology calls it behavioral inertia. Different language, same truth. Once movement stops, restarting feels exponentially harder. That's why waiting is so seductive. Waiting allows you to feel responsible without actually being responsible. You can say, I'm working on it and I'm thinking it through, I'm preparing, and those words relieve pressure temporarily. But time doesn't recognize preparation as progress. Life only responds to motion. Here's the uncomfortable realization most people avoid. You don't break free from stagnation by solving your entire life. You break free by proving, through action, that you still have agency. Even small action, especially small action, because the mind updates its beliefs after behavior, not before. Take one intentional step and something subtle shifts, not externally, internally. You begin to experience yourself differently. I moved. I chose. I didn't wait. That internal shift matters more than any immediate result because identity begins to loosen. And once identity loosens, change becomes possible again. This is why people who rebuild their lives rarely start with grand transformations. They start with embarrassingly small decisions. Waking up earlier, making the call they've avoided, saying no once, starting imperfectly. From the outside, it looks insignificant. From the inside, it's revolutionary because it breaks the spell of passivity, and here's where a quiet truth deserves your attention. If something in you resonates right now, if this feels uncomfortably accurate, don't rush past it. Pause. Let that discomfort sit for a moment. That sensation is not guilt, it's recognition. And recognition is the doorway to change if you don't ignore it. Many people sense this moment and immediately distract themselves. They scroll, they click away, they tell themselves they'll come back to this later. But later is where insight goes to die. If this reflection feels personal, that's not an accident. And if you want to explore this line of thinking further, not just intellectually but practically, stay with it. Because in the next session, we'll uncover the comfort trap itself. Why safety feels intelligent, why waiting feels justified, and why the life you want cannot exist inside the boundaries you're protecting. Comfort is rarely recognized as a problem while you're inside it. It feels reasonable, safe, Earned. You tell yourself you're being patient, not passive. Practical, not afraid. Realistic, not limited. And that's exactly why comfort is so dangerous. Unlike obvious threats, comfort doesn't trigger alarm bells. It doesn't demand immediate action. It doesn't feel like something you need to escape from. It feels like something you deserve. But comfort has a hidden cost, one most people only recognize when it's too late. Comfort slowly disconnects effort from reward. When your basic needs are met, your survival instinct quiets down. There's no urgent pressure to change, no immediate consequence for staying still. So your mind starts optimizing for ease rather than growth. It begins asking a different question. How can I avoid discomfort today? Not, how can I build a meaningful life? Not, what would stretch me? But, what feels easiest right now? That shift seems small, but over time it reshapes everything. You choose familiarity over possibility, certainty over potential, short term relief over long term fulfillment, and slowly ambition dulls. This is why people can remain in situations they openly dislike for years. A job that drains them, a routine that numbs them, a version of themselves they've outgrown. They don't stay because it's good. They stay because leaving feels worse, at least emotionally. The human brain is incredibly sensitive to loss. Psychologists call this loss aversion, the tendency to fear losing what we already have more than we desire, what we could gain. So, even if the future holds something better, the mind fixates on what might be lost: stability, identity, approval, familiar structure. And because those losses feel immediate and real while future gains feel abstract, the brain chooses to stay again and again. But here's the paradox no one warns you about. The longer you stay in comfort, the more fragile you become. Comfort reduces your tolerance for discomfort. Your ability to endure uncertainty weakens. Your confidence in your own resilience erodes. So, the very thing you rely on for safety makes you less capable of change. That's why stepping outside comfort later feels overwhelming. Not because the challenge is bigger, but because you've trained yourself to avoid challenge. This is how people mistake comfort for stability. True stability comes from adaptability, not predictability. A person who knows they can handle discomfort is far more secure than someone whose entire life depends on everything staying the same. Philosophers understood this long before modern psychology. The Stoics deliberately practiced discomfort, cold, hunger, simplicity, not because suffering was noble, but because dependence on comfort made people weak. They believed that if you could voluntarily face discomfort, you could not be controlled by fear of it. Modern life does the opposite. It removes friction, removes difficulty, removes challenge. And in doing so, it removes growth. Growth has always lived on the other side of discomfort. Every expansion of identity requires a contraction of safety. You cannot become more without letting go of what feels familiar. Yet most people wait for comfort to permit growth. They say, once I feel secure, then I'll take risks. But comfort never gives permission, it only asks for more loyalty. And the longer you give it, the more it demands. This is why people wake up one day feeling trapped by a life they actively chose. Not through decision, but through avoidance. They didn't choose misery, they chose ease. Repeatedly. And ease compounded. Here's the most unsettling truth of all. Comfort doesn't just slow you down, it quietly convinces you that wanting more is selfish, unrealistic, or dangerous. You start shrinking your desires to fit your circumstances instead of expanding your circumstances to fit your desires. You call it maturity. You call it realism. But deep down, it feels like something has gone missing. That missing thing is not motivation. It's courage. Not dramatic courage. Quiet courage. the courage to tolerate uncertainty, the courage to look foolish, the courage to act without guarantees. This is where many people stop. Not because they can't go further, but because comfort whispers that stopping is wise. But wisdom that costs you your aliveness is not wisdom, it's resignation. And in the next session, we'll confront the most subtle form of resignation of all, those the belief that this is just who I am, and how identity itself becomes the final barrier between you and change. At a certain point, comfort stops being something you have and becomes something you are. It settles into your identity. You don't just live cautiously, huh? You start thinking of yourself as a cautious person. You don't just hesitate, you become someone who isn't decisive. You don't just avoid risk, you label yourself as realistic, grounded, sensible. And once identity hardens, behavior follows automatically. This is the most invisible prison of all, because you no longer feel stuck by circumstances, you feel stuck by yourself. Psychologists call this identity foreclosure, the moment when a person unconsciously decides who they are and stops questioning it. It usually forms early. A few failures, a few criticisms, a few moments where trying felt painful or embarrassing. So the mind adapts, it builds a safer story. I'm not the kind of person who does that. I've never been good at this. That's just not me. Those sentences feel honest. They feel stable. But they quietly shut down possibility. Once identity is defined by limitation, action feels like betrayal, not growth. And the brain will always protect identity over potential. This is why advice often fails. You can give someone perfect strategies, clear steps, and proven systems, and nothing changes. Because strategies don't move identity, action does. Identity is not changed by insight, it is updated by evidence. Every small action you take becomes proof of who you are becoming. Every avoided action becomes proof of who you are staying. This is why passivity compounds faster than effort. Doing nothing reinforces the belief that nothing can be done. But here's the critical shift most people never make. You do not need to believe in a new identity before acting. Belief comes later. Action comes first. Most people wait until they feel confident to act. But confidence is not prerequisite, it's a byproduct. You don't become confident and then move. You move, and confidence catches up. The same is true for discipline, courage, and clarity. They are not personality traits, they are skills built through repeated exposure to discomfort. And this is where many people get trapped in endless self analysis. They keep trying to figure themselves out, but clarity doesn't emerge from thinking alone. It emerges from friction with reality, from trying, from failing, from adjusting. You learn who you are by what you do under pressure, not by what you think about in safety. This is why identity change always feels uncomfortable. You are letting go of a familiar version of yourself, even if that version was limiting. And the brain resists loss, even when the loss is necessary. But here's the paradox. The old identity only feels safe because it's known, not because it's true. You are not the sum of your past habits. You are not defined by previous hesitation. You are not locked into the patterns you've rehearsed. But you will become whatever you repeatedly act out, whether intentionally or not. This is where a quiet decision becomes unavoidable. You can continue protecting the story of who you've been, or you can begin acting in alignment with who you want to become, even before you fully believe it. And if you're still listening, still engaged, still questioning, that's not accidental. It means something in you hasn't accepted the smaller life yet. That awareness matters. If this perspective feels unsettling, don't dismiss it. Sit with it. Because awareness without action fades quickly. But awareness paired with even one deliberate step begins to reshape identity. And as this series continues, we'll move from understanding to execution, from why change feels impossible to how momentum is actually built step by step in real life. Stay with this. The next session will dismantle the myth that motivation comes first and reveal why waiting to feel ready keeps people trapped indefinitely. One of the most damaging beliefs people carry is the idea that action should feel natural, that when the time is right, motivation will arrive, that clarity will settle in, that confidence will appear first, and movement will follow. This belief sounds reasonable, it feels logical, but it quietly keeps millions of people frozen. Because readiness is not a signal, it's a reward. The human nervous system is designed to conserve energy. It does not volunteer effort without proof that the effort is safe or worthwhile. So when you wait to feel motivated before acting, you're asking your brain to break its own rules. Motivation is produced by progress, not the other way around. This is why people who take action seem to have more energy. They don't. They're just creating feedback loops. Small effort leads to small progress. Small progress produces momentum. Momentum generates motivation. But when action never starts, that loop never forms. Instead, another loop takes over. Overthinking, hesitation, avoidance, self doubt, more overthinking. This loop feels productive because it involves thought, but it leads nowhere. Philosophers warned about this long before psychology had language for it. Seneca wrote that people waste most of life waiting for a time that never arrives. Not because they're lazy, but because they confuse intention with movement. Modern neuroscience confirms this. Thinking about action activates reward pathways in the brain. You feel a small sense of progress without doing anything. So planning, researching, and preparing become substitutes for execution. You get the emotional relief of doing something without the risk of actual change. This is why preparation can become a form of procrastination. Not always, but often, especially when preparation never ends. The truth is uncomfortable. Most people don't need more information. They need friction. They need exposure. They need to feel the resistance of reality. Because reality gives feedback, thoughts do not. This is why experience teaches faster than theory. You don't learn courage by understanding fear. You learn it by acting while afraid. You don't learn clarity by thinking harder. You learn it by moving and adjusting. And you don't build confidence by visualizing success. You build it by surviving imperfection. But this leads to another quiet fear people rarely admit. What if I try and fail? Failure feels final when identity is fragile. If you see outcomes as reflections of who you are, failure becomes threatening. But if you see outcomes as information, failure becomes useful. The difference is not talent, it's interpretation. People who move consistently are not immune to doubt. They've simply trained themselves to treat action as data, yeah? Not as judgment. Each attempt answers a question. What worked? What didn't? What do I adjust? Next, this mindset removes drama from effort. Action becomes experimentation, not performance. And experimentation removes the emotional weight that keeps people frozen. This is how momentum is actually built, not through inspiration, but through tolerance for imperfection, the ability to act without guarantees, the willingness to look unpolished, or the discipline to show up even when the result is unclear. Here's something rarely acknowledged. The version of you who feels ready will never exist until you move. That version is created by experience, not by waiting. So every day you delay action in the name of readiness, you postpone becoming the person who could handle it. This is the great irony of passivity. You wait to feel capable, but capability is forged through doing. And the longer you wait, the more intimidating the first step becomes. Not because it's harder, but because you've trained yourself to avoid it. But avoidance is a habit, and habits can be replaced. Not with grand resolutions, with small interruptions. One deliberate action taken before comfort has a chance to object. That moment matters. Because once action begins, even imperfectly, the entire internal dynamic shifts. And in the next session, we'll explore how fear operates at a neurological level and how to move with fear instead of waiting for it to disappear. Fear is often misunderstood as an enemy, something to eliminate, something to overcome, something that must disappear before action is possible. But fear was never designed to vanish. It was designed to guide attention. Neuroscience shows that fear activates the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for threat detection and survival. Its job is simple: keep you alive. The problem is not that fear exists. The problem is what the modern mind interprets as danger. Your brain does not distinguish well between physical threats and psychological ones: public failure, rejection, embarrassment, uncertainty. To the nervous system, these can feel as threatening as physical harm. So when you consider stepping outside your comfort zone, your body reacts first. Tension, racing thoughts, hesitation. This reaction is not sabotage, it's protection. Understanding this changes everything because it means fear is not evidence that you shouldn't act. It's evidence that something unfamiliar is happening. Most people make a fatal assumption at this point. They believe fear means stop, but fear simply means pay attention. People who move consistently do not lack fear. They've trained themselves to reinterpret it. They don't ask, how do I get rid of this feeling? They ask, can I move with this feeling? This shift is subtle but powerful. Instead of fighting fear, you acknowledge it. I feel uncomfortable. I feel uncertain. I feel exposed. And then you act anyway. This rewires the brain. Each time you move despite fear, the amygdala learns something new. This discomfort did not kill me. That learning reduces future resistance, not instantly, gradually. This is how courage is built biologically, not philosophically. You are teaching your nervous system that uncertainty is survivable. But when fear repeatedly stops action, the opposite lesson is learned. Avoidance teaches the brain that fear equals danger. So fear grows stronger. Not because the situation is worse, but because the brain believes avoidance is necessary for survival. This is why people who avoid discomfort become more anxious over time, not less. Avoidance reinforces fear. Action dissolves it, slowly, imperfectly, reliably. This is also why thinking your way out of fear rarely works. Fear lives in the body, not in logic. You don't reason with it. You train it through exposure, through repetition, through movement. This is why small actions matter so much. A massive leap can overwhelm the nervous system, but small intentional discomfort builds capacity. You don't need to transform your life in one moment. You need to prove to your brain that you can tolerate more than you think. Each time you do something slightly uncomfortable, speak up, begin, commit, show up, you expand your internal range. And that expansion compounds. But there is one more layer most people miss. Fear often masks something deeper: grief. Grief for a version of yourself that never existed. Grief for the time you can't get back. grief for possibilities that feel closed. Action threatens that grief because once you act, you can no longer pretend. Pretend that circumstances are to blame. Pretend that the future is still open without effort. Action forces honesty, and honesty is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating because it returns power. You stop negotiating with fear. You stop waiting for comfort. You stop asking permission. You act, not recklessly, not impulsively, but deliberately. And with each step, fear loses authority. Not because it disappears, but because it is no longer in charge. In the next session, we'll examine the final trap that keeps people passive, the belief that responsibility is a burden rather than the very thing that restores meaning and direction. There is a moment in every person's life when avoidance stops feeling neutral and starts feeling heavy. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just heavy. You feel it when decisions linger longer than they should, when small responsibilities feel exhausting, when you sense that something important is being delayed, but you can't quite name what it is. That weight is not pressure from the world, it is the absence of responsibility. This sounds backwards because most people believe responsibility is what drains them. They say they want freedom, less obligation, less pressure. But freedom without responsibility doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like drift. Responsibility gives shape to effort. It gives direction to energy. It gives meaning to struggle. Without it, life becomes a sequence of reactions instead of a series of choices. Philosophers have understood this for centuries. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that human beings are condemned to be free, not because freedom is pleasant, but because we are always choosing even when we pretend not to. Not choosing is still a choice, and the cost of avoiding responsibility doesn't disappear. It accumulates. When you avoid responsibility, you don't escape consequences, you literally you delay them. They arrive later, heavier and harder to manage. This is why people who avoid small responsibilities often feel overwhelmed by large ones. They haven't built the internal structure required to carry weight. Responsibility is not a burden placed on you. It is a capacity you develop. Like strength, avoiding weight makes you weaker. Carrying weight and gradually makes you stronger. The same applies psychologically. When you take responsibility for small things, your schedule, your health, your decisions, something subtle shifts. You begin to experience yourself as a cause, not an effect. I did this. I chose this. I can change this. That internal experience is deeply stabilizing. It reduces anxiety, not increases it. Because uncertainty is far more tolerable when you believe your actions matter. This is why meaning collapses in passive lives. Meaning requires authorship. You cannot feel meaning in a life you don't feel responsible for. Viktor Frankl observed that meaning is not something we find, it is something we respond to. Life asks questions through difficulty, limitation, and uncertainty. Responsibility is the act of answering. When people say they feel lost, what they often mean is that they've stopped answering. They wait for clarity before committing. But clarity doesn't arrive without commitment. It emerges after responsibility is taken. Here is the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. No one is coming to give your life direction. Not society, not circumstances, not motivation. Direction is chosen, responsibility is claimed. And once it is, something almost paradoxical happens. Life feels lighter, not because it's easier, but because it's aligned. You stop expending energy resisting reality, you stop negotiating with time, you stop hoping things will change on their own. You act. And action, even imperfect action, creates movement. Movement creates feedback, feedback creates growth. This is why people who accept responsibility often appear calmer, even under pressure. They are no longer split internally, they are not waiting and wanting at the same time. They are engaged. And engagement restores dignity. Not pride, dignity. The quiet sense that you are participating fully in your own existence. In the next session, we'll explore how small decisions compound into identity and how the direction of your life is quietly being set every single day, whether you notice it or not. Most people imagine their life is shaped by a few big decisions, a career choice, a relationship, a turning point. But in reality, lives are shaped by patterns so small they barely register. What you do when you're tired, what you choose when no one is watching, what you return to when motivation fades. These moments don't feel important. That's why they're powerful. Identity is not formed by intention, it is formed by repetition. Every action you repeat sends a signal to the mind. This is who I am. Not because you declare it, but because you demonstrate it. And the brain believes behavior more than words. This is why people can sincerely want change and still reinforce the opposite identity every day. They say they want discipline, but practice avoidance. They say they want confidence, but rehearse silence. They say they want growth, but choose comfort. None of this happens consciously. It happens through default. And defaults shape destiny. Psychologists refer to this as self-signaling. You learn who you are by watching what you do. So when you consistently delay action, your mind concludes, I am someone who delays. When you consistently follow through, even imperfectly, your mind concludes, I am someone who moves. Identity does not require perfection, it requires consistency. This is why grand resolutions fail. They demand too much change at once. But small commitments, kept repeatedly, quietly rewire self-perception. You don't need to become a different person overnight. You need to interrupt the pattern long enough for a new signal to emerge. This is also why motivation spikes and fades. Motivation is emotional. Identity is structural. When action aligns with identity, effort feels lighter. When action conflicts with identity, effort feels exhausting. So the question becomes, what identity are your daily actions reinforcing? Not what you hope to be, not what you think you are, but what your behavior is voting for. This is where many people feel exposed because the answer is uncomfortable. But discomfort here is useful. It points directly to leverage. You don't need to redesign your entire life. You need to adjust the smallest repeatable behaviors that contradict the future you want, one choice at a time. This is how momentum begins. Not through intensity, through direction. Small actions don't feel powerful in isolation, but direction compounds. And compounding is how lives change. A plane only needs to shift a few degrees to land in a completely different city. The same is true for identity. But there is a final illusion to confront. People assume consistency requires willpower. It doesn't. It requires environment. Your surroundings shape behavior more than intention ever will. If your environment makes avoidance easy, avoidance becomes default. If your environment makes action visible, action becomes natural. This is why willpower fails when context stays the same. Change the environment, and behavior follows. This isn't weakness, it's understanding human nature. And once you understand it, you stop blaming yourself and start designing your life. In the final sessions, we'll bring everything together. It's how to exit passivity permanently, how to sustain momentum, and how to live deliberately instead of accidentally. There comes a point when insight stops helping and starts becoming a hiding place. You understand the patterns, you recognize the traps, you can explain why people get stuck. including yourself. And yet, nothing moves. This is where many intelligent people quietly stall. Not because they lack awareness, but because awareness has replaced commitment. They stay in analysis because analysis feels safe. It feels controlled. It feels intelligent. It feels like progress. But understanding without execution is just a more sophisticated form of avoidance. At some level, you already know what matters to you. You know what you've been postponing. You know where you've been passive. You know what decision keeps returning to your mind. The reason it returns is not confusion, it's resistance. Action threatens certainty. Once you act, excuses disappear. Once you act, outcomes become real. Once you act, you can no longer pretend that time isn't passing. So the mind keeps you thinking instead. But life does not respond to thought, it responds to movement. This is where the concept of commitment becomes essential. Not motivation, not inspiration. Commitment. Commitment means acting before certainty arrives. It means choosing direction without guarantees. It means deciding that movement matters more than mood. Most people misunderstand commitment as intensity. They imagine it requires force, pressure, or dramatic effort. It doesn't. True commitment is quiet. It shows up consistently, even when emotion fluctuates. It removes the daily negotiation. Instead of asking, do I feel like it today? You ask, is this aligned with who I'm becoming? And if the answer is yes, so you move. This removes friction. Decision fatigue fades. Overthinking weakens. Momentum stabilizes. But there is something deeper happening beneath the surface. Commitment changes your relationship with time. When you're passive, time feels like something that happens to you. When you're committed, time becomes something you use. Each day becomes directional. Even slow days feel meaningful because they're connected to something larger. This is how meaning returns, not through intensity, but through coherence. Your actions begin to make sense together. Your effort accumulates instead of scattering. And with accumulation comes trust. Trust in yourself. Not the inflated kind, the grounded kind. The kind that says, I may not know exactly how this will turn out, but I know I won't abandon myself. That trust is rare, and it is built only one way, through follow through. This is why broken promises to yourself are so damaging. They teach the mind that intention doesn't matter, but kept promises, even small ones, rebuild internal authority. You begin to listen to yourself again. You begin to act on your own words. This is what separates people who change from people who stay stuck. Not talent, not luck, not circumstances, reliability with themselves. And now there is only one session left, one final shift to make. Because understanding action, fear, comfort, identity, responsibility, and commitment means nothing unless it leads to a different way of living. In the final session, we'll confront the simplest and hardest truth of all, that your life will always move in the direction of what you repeatedly choose, whether consciously or unconsciously. And that realizing this is not a burden, it is the beginning of freedom. At the end of everything we've explored, there's no dramatic revelation left, no secret technique, no hidden philosophy, no final breakthrough waiting to be discovered. There is only a truth so simple that most people spend their entire lives avoiding it. Your life moves in the direction of what you repeatedly choose, not what you intend, not what you hope, not what you think about late at night. What you choose again and again, nakon parnafran pushekan, especially when no one is watching. This is both confronting and liberating. Confronting, because it removes every comfortable illusion. Liberating, because it returns power to where it has always belonged. with you. You are not trapped by fate. You are not stuck because of one mistake. You are not behind because you failed some invisible test. You are where your patterns have led you. And patterns can change. Not all at once, not without discomfort, but inevitably if you stop abandoning yourself. Most people think freedom feels exciting. It doesn't. Freedom feels quiet. It feels like alignment, like internal honesty, like no longer negotiating with the same excuses every day. Freedom is not the absence of responsibility, it is choosing what you are responsible for. Once you accept this, life simplifies. Not because it becomes easy, but because it becomes clear. You stop asking, what should I do with my life? And then start asking, what is the next honest action? You stop waiting for motivation. You stop trying to eliminate fear. You stop searching for permission. You act. And then you act again. Not perfectly, not confidently, but deliberately. This is how momentum becomes a lifestyle instead of a phase. This is how identity stabilizes instead of collapsing. This is how meaning is built, not found. Meaning is not something life hands you, it is something you create by taking responsibility for your direction. And here is the final truth worth sitting with. No one ever wakes up one day and suddenly becomes disciplined, courageous, or fulfilled. They become those things slowly by choosing differently in small moments that don't feel important at the time. Those moments are happening every day, right now. The question is not whether change is possible. The question is whether you will keep choosing comfort or start choosing alignment, whether you will keep waiting or begin, because time will move either way. And years from now, you will be living inside the result of the choices you are repeating today. That is not a threat, it is an invitation to step forward, to participate, to stop drifting and start directing. Not tomorrow, not when it feels easier, now. Because this moment, quiet, ordinary, unremarkable, is exactly where every meaningful life begins.